There are moments in television history that don't just unfold, they explode in the hearts of fans, rewriting everything we thought we knew. Heartland Season 19 delivered one of those unforgettable moments. After years of grieving, healing, and slowly accepting a painful reality, Amy Fleming faces the impossible. Ty Borden, her soulmate, the father of her child, the man she lost, standing alive before her eyes. This isn't just a scene, it's a heartbeat stopped, a breath stolen, a future rewritten. And in that one breathtaking moment, everything changes. Heartland has always been more than just a story about horses and ranch life. It's a story about resilience, second chances, and the healing power of love. When Ty Borden died in Season 14, it wasn't just a plot twist. It was a loss that shook the foundation of Heartland itself. Viewers mourned with Amy, grieved alongside Jack, Lou, and Tim, and carried the heavy silence that Ty's absence left behind. Amy's journey to rebuild her life was slow, fragile, and filled with moments where the simplest memories would bring her to her knees. Spartan's quiet nudge, the empty space at the dinner table, Lindy's innocent questions about her father, these small moments etched the depth of that loss into every frame. Yet beneath that sadness, a small flicker of hope never died. Fans clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. Throughout Season 18, Heartland's writers planted delicate clues like seeds waiting to bloom. Amy's dreams were more vivid. Lindy spoke of seeing her father in the clouds, hearing his laugh in the barn, Jack's pauses, Lou's lingering stares at old photographs, tiny, almost invisible signs that Ty's story wasn't fully written yet. These hints weren't loud, they whispered to the heart, encouraging fans to hope without daring to believe too much. As Season 19 opened, everything felt both ordinary and heavy, like the air before a storm. There was no grand announcement, no over-the-top music or flashy scenes. Instead, the beauty of Heartland's storytelling took over. Under a wide Alberta sky brushed with early morning light, life moved in its slow, comforting rhythm. Amy brushed Spartan's mane inside the barn, her hands steady, but her mind distant. Outside, little Lindy chased butterflies, her laughter floating like a song. Everything felt peaceful. And yet, beneath that peace, something stirred. Then, without warning, it happened. A shift in the air. A figure at the tree line, slow, steady steps moving forward as if pulled by fate itself. Amy's brush fell from her hand. Her world tilted. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned, and there he was. Ty Borden. Older. Weathered. Real. Not a ghost, not a dream, but flesh and blood, standing just yards away. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The sound of the horses faded. The wind silenced. Amy's entire soul seemed to recognize him before her mind could even catch up. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled toward him, fear and hope colliding so violently that it almost knocked her off her feet. "No," she whispered, voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. "It can't be." But Ty, her Ty, spoke her name. Just once. Softly. Brokenly. And in that one word, every wall around Amy's battered heart crumbled. She reached out with trembling hands, terrified that if she touched him, he would vanish like smoke. But his skin was warm, his grip steady, and when he pulled her into his arms, it was like coming home after being lost for a lifetime. The barn, the fields, the ranch, they all seemed to breathe again. Spartan nickered softly, as if welcoming back an old friend. And in Amy's arms, Ty held on like a man who had been fighting his way back to her through hell itself. But how could this be real? What had happened? Where had he been? Questions swirled in Amy's mind like a rising storm. Yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. He was here. He was alive. And against all odds, a love that everyone thought had been buried in the cold ground found its way back into the sunlight. The journey was just beginning. Heartland had promised a season like no other. And it was clear now. This would not be a simple happy reunion. This would be a story of pain, of forgiveness, of slowly piecing together broken hearts and building something stronger from the ruins. Amy didn't just get back the man she loved. She was about to discover parts of herself she had locked away, hidden even from her own heart. And as Ty stood before her, equally broken and hopeful, one thing became clear. Nothing about this miracle would be easy. but it would be real. And in Heartland, that's the only kind of story that matters. The first words between Amy and Ty were barely words at all, just shattered breaths, trembling touches, the kind of silence that says more than any language ever could. But when the first wave of disbelief finally eased enough for Amy to pull back and look into his eyes, she realized the truth was far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Ty's face, though achingly familiar, carried deep scars, both visible and invisible. His hands were rougher, his gaze heavier. This was not the same man who had left Heartland so long ago. This was someone who had survived something unthinkable. Tears streamed down Amy's face as she stumbled backward, overwhelmed. "How?" she gasped, voice raw and broken. Ty's own eyes shimmered, 1,000 unsaid words trapped behind them. "It's a long story," he murmured, voice hoarse from too many years without her. "But I'm here now, and I'm never leaving again." Still shaking, Amy led him inside the house. Every step felt surreal. Pictures of Ty still hung on the walls, a life frozen in memory. How many nights had she sat by the fireplace, telling Lindy stories about her father? How many mornings had she woken up aching, wishing just to hear his voice one more time? And now, impossibly, he was here, alive and breathing, under the same roof. Jack was the first to see him. The old cowboy froze mid-step, the coffee mug in his hand shattering against the floor. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Jack's lip trembled, his voice cracked with disbelief. "Ty?" he whispered, almost afraid to believe his own eyes. Ty gave a single, broken nod. And then Jack, the man who had always carried the family's grief quietly on his shoulders, crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Ty into a crushing hug, tears falling freely. One by one, the rest of the family gathered, the news traveling like wildfire. Lou rushed in, her eyes wide, her voice choking on 1,000 questions. Tim stared as if he'd seen a ghost, unable to hide the raw emotion crumbling his usual tough exterior. Even Katie and Parker stood stunned, watching a piece of their childhood dreams come back to life. Finally, gathered around the kitchen table, Ty began to speak. His story came out slowly, painfully. After the gunshot wound that everyone thought had ended his life, Ty hadn't died. He had been rushed to a remote clinic, barely breathing, deep in the wilderness. A small, isolated medical team had fought to save him, but complications set in. A high fever, a coma. For months, he drifted in a twilight between life and death. When he finally woke, he had lost his memory, wiped clean by trauma and fever. For years, he lived in a quiet mountain town under another name, piecing together fragments of a life he couldn't fully remember. Faces haunted his dreams. Amy's face, Lindy's laughter, Spartan's whinny, but he couldn't place them. It wasn't until a year ago, after a horseback accident in the mountains, that the memories came flooding back with terrifying clarity. He remembered everything. The ranch, the family, Amy, his love for her stronger than any force he had ever known. But getting back to Heartland wasn't simple. He had no money, no clear records. Ty had to fight his way through a maze of red tape, legal battles, and the torment of wondering whether Amy had moved on without him. He didn't want to destroy her new life if she had found happiness again, so he waited, watched. And finally, when he saw that the ache in her eyes still carried his name, he knew it was time to come home. As Ty's voice broke, recounting the years of silence, Amy reached across the table and gripped his hand tightly, grounding him. Tears fell freely around the room. No one knew whether to scream in joy, cry in heartbreak, or simply sit in stunned silence. The revelation sent shockwaves through Heartland. Friends, neighbors, the entire town, everyone had their own grief, their own memories of losing Ty. And now, just like that, the story was changing. Second chances like this didn't come often. Life rarely rewrote itself in such a brutal, beautiful way. But not everyone was ready to move forward. Some wounds had festered too long, and forgiveness wouldn't come easily. Ty's return brought happiness. Yes, but it also stirred old fears, buried anger, and painful questions about choices made and time lost. Still, in Amy's heart, one truth rang louder than all the doubts. Ty was home, and no matter how long it took, no matter how broken the road ahead might be, they would walk it together. For love like theirs doesn't just survive tragedy, it becomes something stronger, something unstoppable. And as the sun set behind the Heartland Ranch, casting long golden shadows across the land, one thing was certain: this was only the beginning of a story fans would never forget. In the days that followed Ty's return, Heartland was filled with a strange mixture of joy and unease. The world had shifted beneath everyone's feet. Life, which had moved painfully forward after Ty's death, now had to find a way to move backward, or perhaps build something entirely new. Amy woke every morning half afraid he would vanish like a dream, and every time she saw him, her heart cracked wide open all over again. But love, even one as deep as Amy and Ty's, cannot erase years of pain overnight. They had changed. Time had carved new lines on their faces and heavier burdens in their hearts. Amy had become harder, stronger, forced by grief to stand alone. Ty had lived years in survival mode, battling loneliness and despair. They weren't the same two people who had built their life together once upon a time. They were strangers who loved each other more deeply than strangers should. And that truth made every step toward healing both beautiful and terrifying. Some moments between them felt effortless. A glance across the barn, the quiet way Ty brushed Lindy's hair back when she wasn't looking, the way Amy instinctively reached for his hand. Pieces of their old life flickered back to life like embers in a dying fire. But just when Amy let herself believe they could pick up where they left off, reality reminded her that rebuilding wasn't that simple. One evening, sitting side by the fireplace, Ty confessed the hardest truth of all. He had doubts, deep, gnawing fears that he wasn't the man Amy had waited for, that maybe she deserved someone whole, someone who hadn't disappeared when she needed him most. Amy's heart shattered hearing the guilt in his voice, the shame he couldn't hide. She wrapped her arms around him, fierce and unyielding, and whispered the only words that mattered. "You're home. That's all that matters." But not everyone shared her certainty. Lou, ever the protector, voiced her concerns openly. She questioned whether Ty's return might cause more harm than good, stirring up old wounds for everyone, especially Lindy, who had spent her childhood believing her father was a hero lost to the stars. How could they explain to a little girl that sometimes heroes get lost and hurt and broken, and sometimes they come home changed? Tim, too, struggled with the situation. Protective of Amy and skeptical of miracles, he kept a wary distance, watching Ty like a hawk. Old tensions flared between the two men, fueled by years of unresolved resentment and guilt. For Tim, the fear wasn't just about Ty hurting Amy again. It was about the fear of losing his daughter to heartbreak a second time. Meanwhile, the ranch itself became a symbol of Ty's absence and return. Everywhere Ty walked, memories followed him. Spartan's whinny echoed through the valley as if recognizing an old friend. The familiar creak of the barn doors, the trail that wound through the hills, all of it welcomed him and yet reminded him how much had changed. And Heartland itself had changed. New faces, new stories, new rhythms that Ty had to learn all over again. He wasn't just fighting to reclaim Amy's love. He was fighting to find his place in a world that had learned to live without him. Tensions came to a head one rainy afternoon when Lindy, overwhelmed by confusion and fear, lashed out at Ty. "You left us," she cried, tears streaking down her face. Amy rushed to her daughter's side, her heart breaking into pieces. Ty dropped to his knees before Lindy, not even trying to stop his own tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice shaking. "I didn't want to. I tried to come back. I never stopped loving you." It wasn't a perfect apology. There are no perfect words for that kind of heartbreak. But it was real, raw. And in that small, vulnerable moment, something shifted. Lindy didn't Just when it seemed that Amy and Ty were finding their way back to each other, life threw one final, brutal test at them. The kind of test that would either break them forever or forge an even stronger bond. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. A call from Ty's doctor, a shadow that passed across his face during a routine checkup, a tension in his shoulders that Amy couldn't quite explain. At first, Ty tried to hide it. After all they had been through, after the miracle of his return, he didn't want anything, especially not his own fears, to drag them back into darkness. He smiled through the pain. He laughed with Lindy, fixed fences with Jack, and kissed Amy like he believed they had all the time in the world. But Amy could see it. She always could. in the way he held her a little too tightly at night, as if afraid she might slip away, in the quiet moments when his hands shook ever so slightly. Finally, the truth came out. Ty's time away hadn't been just a story of survival. It had left scars inside him, wounds that no one could see. And now, those old injuries were threatening his future. His health was more fragile than anyone had realized. He faced a choice: risk everything to stay on the ranch and live the life he loved, or leave again for intense treatment that might save him, but would tear him away from Heartland once more. When Amy heard the news, it felt like the world had ripped in two all over again. She had just gotten him back. How could she let him go? How could she face another goodbye, even if it was for the chance of a longer life together someday? The fear gripped her so tightly she could hardly breathe. But Ty, ever the stubborn fighter, wasn't ready to give up. He sat with Amy under the open sky one night, the stars above them like silent witnesses, and told her he would fight, not just for himself, but for her, for Lindy, for the family that had never given up on him, even when the rest of the world had. Still, it wasn't a decision they could make alone. Heartland was a family, and every member of it had a voice in what came next. Jack, with tears he didn't even try to hide, urged Ty to be brave enough to choose life. Lou and Tim stood by Amy, reminding her that loving someone sometimes means letting them go so they can come back stronger. The night before Ty was set to leave for treatment, the family gathered at the ranch for a farewell no one wanted to call a goodbye. It was a quiet evening, full of laughter that broke at the edges, hugs that lingered too long, and promises whispered like prayers into the wind. Amy and Ty stood alone by the barn, the same place where so many of their memories lived. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. "No matter where I go," he said softly, "my heart stays here, with you." Amy, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispered back, "And mine goes with you." As Ty drove away the next morning, Lindy ran down the driveway after the truck, waving a picture she had drawn of their family together. It flapped wildly in the breeze, a symbol of hope, of love that refused to be broken by distance or fear. Days turned into weeks. Every phone call, every letter, every video chat became a lifeline. Amy poured her heart into the ranch, into Lindy, into keeping Ty's place alive and waiting for his return. The wait was excruciating, filled with moments of doubt and despair. But underneath it all burned a stubborn, unshakable hope. And then, finally, the day came. A familiar truck pulled into the driveway, stirring the dust and the hearts of everyone who waited. Ty stepped out, thinner, paler, but alive. Alive and smiling. And Amy ran to him, throwing herself into his arms as Lindy's laughter rang out across the fields. They had survived the impossible, not once, but twice. As the sun set over Heartland, painting the sky with gold and fire, Amy and Ty stood hand in hand, looking out over the land that had seen their greatest sorrows and now their greatest joy. Their story wasn't a perfect fairy tale. It was messy, painful, and hard-won. But it was real, and it was theirs. And as they faced the future together, whatever it might bring, one truth shone brighter than anything else. Some loves are meant to last forever, even when life tries its hardest to tear them apart. At Heartland, miracles aren't just possible, they're proof that love, no matter how battered or broken, can always find its way home.